In Canada, I think it's Latin American Heritage Month. In the US, it's Hispanic Heritage Month. There's a lot of different terms that are thrown out to identify our culture. Mm-hmm. How do you look at that? Is there one correct term? Is there a term that you identify with?
Yeah.
How do we educate even ourselves on how we identify?
I started to use raza, but then realized that I had to explain. And I would say, when I say raza, I mean all razas. And so all of a sudden, I just used a word and an identification of a word to unify us, right?
Be comfortable, sit back. This is your house, bro. Esa es tu casa.
Narvaez, tocayo. My tocayo right here.
Jesse.
Alex, my tocayo.
Jesse, I want to first of all say thank you for coming to the crib, man. It's amazing to have you here. I'm glad that you're in Toronto. We had a chance to catch up a little bit before the cameras were rolling.
But I'm sure it stimulated some more questions.
Of course, 100%. That's all I'm thinking about now is like, wow, that conversation needed to be captured. So I want to relive some of those moments. But I want to start off by saying, and I think you experienced this a little bit on the ride getting here as we were talking, the Latino culture and the Latino experience differs so much from region to region. Mm-hmm. Being in Latino America versus being in America versus being in Canada versus being in Europe. Mm-hmm. But we're all still united. And you said something interesting to me, that we're all united through our indigenous roots. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
So when I think about that, and I think about your contribution in cinema and the way that you've been able to portray that, bro, your roles have been what people look at almost as a Bible in some cases to what Latino culture is, what carnalismo is. I want you to speak on that a little bit. Like it's a big responsibility to carry when you feel and you know that there's a lot of people in a certain community that look to you to understand or identify who they are.
It's the maternal energy of our cultura, you know. We talk about la madre a lot, and what that, as much as we're a very macho culture, right? You know, siempre la virgen, and you know, la madre, and you know, honoring the woman, and it's kind of been lost in that colonial mentality, ¿verdad? And I think we all experience that as indigenous culturas de la tierra. But I think it goes back to that. And you know, my madres were the ones who taught me the music. So even though my father was the accomplished accordeonista, early on, when he wasn't around, and my grandmother was the one singing, my grandmother. And every time I needed to learn one of his songs, I would go, ¿Qué quiere decir esta frase? And she would teach me Spanish through the songs and teach me the song. But then I realized she was the source of the music. She was teaching him the tangos that he was doing as boleros. She was telling him the stories that then he was able to transfer into, you know, the ranchera or the corrido, whatever he was, the polka he was playing. And so I saw that. And you know, we grew up with him as the alpha performer. And then my sister, who was a year older than me, Marina, she was the alpha performer in the siblings. So me and my brother, who's also now an accomplished artist, we grew up watching, you know, our peer taking all of this información and then relating it in a song, in a dance, in a performance, in a presentation. So we grew up with that as a normal way of communicating, not only to each other, but then entre familias. Those were the gatherings. Sacaban los instrumentos and they would start jamming. And you know, when we were talking about how different the cultural experiences are in terms of country, the one thing that you can relate to, even though again it was colonized out of us, was that ability to continue to communicate to each other in an artistic way.
Right.
Con la música, con las canciones, con los bailes, con las danzas as indigenous people, right? And I think that's something that stays with us genetically. So when they talk about genetic memory, Y esa es la memoria that comes back to us when we then take a hold of that power. So para mí, as a young artista, I always knew that my culture, my traditions, my teachings were my power. And every step of the way, as I got into the industry, as I got into college, there was always that challenge that was not there. And I think it was at that point that I realized that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was supposed to be doing. And people ask me, when did you decide to become an actor? Like everybody makes a career profession choice. You know, you talked about los chavalones of our cultura who want to study it in a higher education setting. And like you said, their immigrant parents work hard to get here, to create a stable environment, to survive, to get you through school. And now you want to learn the arts? Oh, you know what I mean?
That's the thing with immigrant families is unfortunately, they're more focused on survival, as they should be. They're coming to a new country. In many cases, in my family's case, coming from El Salvador, we were escaping a war. So we actually came to Canada as refugees, not only immigrants, refugees. So there was no... let's focus on the arts. You want to paint, you want to act. That wasn't part of the dialogue at home. It was how to superarse, how do you want to become a doctor? Like, this is what you're here for.
But isn't then that the death of your cultura?
Yes, it could
when
be.
You lose your unique way of talking. And I think that's why films like Blood In, Blood Out, Mi Vida Loca, La Misión, they survive the tests of time. Because it's not only what we do as artists. And I tell you, what I did was, you know, an entire lifetime of absorbing this information, of getting really good at talking and dancing and saying it in our language, so that by the time you get that opportunity, because remember, it was a very rare opportunity to play an authentic cultural character and to be allowed to do it my way. Because Taylor Hackford knew of my work. I had met him during the auditions of La Bamba, so he knew that I was authentic to my voice. So when he approached me with Blood In, Blood Out, he didn't say, hey, can you come audition for this? He goes, I need you, and I need you to help me cast the Vatos Locos. And I said, okay, Taylor. I go, but first of all, a gang movie, sir? You know, I just came off of 3 years on television playing a student who is singing and dancing his heart out for his family, for his culture, and now the next thing you want me to do is, you know, my first film was with Martin Scorsese in New York Stories, the New York Stories segment, Life Lessons.
It was a 3-part film.
It was a 3-part film. Woody Allen, Francis Ford Coppola. Look at it as a student of the game. Here's my opportunity to watch Martin Scorsese work, to watch Marty, the Scorsese.
What was that like?
It was beautiful. Because again, having trained myself to be a learner, right, as an artist, that was my next level. That was film school. That was film. Those couple of days that I watched him, and you know, Martin is, oh my God, you know, I can tell you, and again, I was only on that. I was on the set for that long, you know, but those 3 days that I worked with him, Nick Nolte, Rosanna Arquette. It was like you can't buy that in a film. You can't pay for that in a film school. And again, as an actor of color, as a Latino actor, as an Indigenous actor, to be able to absorb that early in your career, you know, that was '88. Man, that's a beautiful thing. But now I take that with me, and I take it with me. You know, when I was working with Peter Bratt, Benjamin's brother, and it was his first film. Right.
I want to ask you a little bit about that film too, because I know that film, we were talking about this on our way here, it didn't get the love that it deserved, for sure. So it went to Sundance, and I've heard you speak on this before in other conversations I've watched, but basically...
we were ahead of the Latino curve,
Also, nobody put an offer down on it. So usually Sundance, films either get bought there or they're already bought when they get to Sundance, right? In this case, it was a crowd favorite. People loved it. People watched it. And then there was no offer that came from a studio, from Hollywood. Nobody wanted it. So to me, I look at that like, wow.
Well, if you look at why is Blood In, Blood Out, why is it streaming now after 30 years? And why did it take a 30th anniversary LA Times editorial where they mentioned it several times, and they mentioned the studio by name, and the fact that they probably were leaving millions on the table in order to get it turned around.
Do you think it's that article that made the studio release it?
I think they thought about it. I think they thought about it and did the math and went, "Oh, why aren't we?" But I think, although to the Latino audience who has very few treasures, that was one of their treasures. So I think when it turned 30, and one of the fans was a journalist, and it spurred a whole bunch of nationwide articles, that's when they kind of went, "Well, what is this? This belongs to us? I didn't know that. Disney?" No, by then they were already on to Disney Plus. So I think, and that was something that Taylor mentioned, is he goes, "Yeah, the tough thing about, after a while, trying to revive the idea was the fact that there's a whole new group of executives at Disney that weren't around when we made this film." So it's kind of like, it did kind of get lost in limbo. But to me, it's the why did it get lost in limbo?
Exactly. Literally what I was about to ask you.
The article revealed, cultural biases that we still fight against, and I don't know how obvious they are in, Canada, but down south is the border, and LA is only 3 hours from the border. So, and LA has a very strong Mexicano presence,
of course.
And that's very strange because, again, Los Angeles, San Francisco, we talked about, if you look at the original map of Mexico before the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which, think about it, that was the 1840s already when that was being hashed out.
Dude, honestly, it looks almost like half of the U.S.
Dude, why is it called
used to be
Colorado?
Mexico?
Yeah. Remember, we were talking about the film that I did shortly after Blood In, Blood Out, Tecumseh, the Last Warrior, where I got to represent as a brown indigenous man my indigenous heritage.
I've heard you speak on the process of getting casted for that too. That was a fascinating process that I heard. You had to prove your bloodline.
Oh, I laugh because I go, man, for years, I've not been. I was too brown to play the lead. Now I'm not brown enough. What's going on with that? And they were like, no, well, and I said, well, this is a good opportunity to actually prove the lineage, right?
Yeah.
So I had to create affidavits. So there was affidavits created. The Apache, the actually blood lineage is through my mother's maternal side, which is wonderful because the maternal in the indigenous community, that's where our strength comes from, community-wise. So maternally, it's my mother who carries the Apache blood through her mother, my grandmother, through her father, whose mother was full-blood Apache. So Mama Chana, Feliciana, was Apache. But we had to prove it through oral history. Right. So witnesses, we had to get my grandmother in, we had to witness her. So it was beautiful, dude. So we actually had to do it in the old school way.
Yeah, and it must have been beautiful to rediscover your identity as an adult too. These are things you feel
the
it.
Stories. We used to talk about Mama Chana and the fact that Mama Chana could not cook inside, that she never acclimated to cooking on a stove.
Wow.
That she had to cook with an open fire outside. But we didn't say that it was because she was Apache. We said that because she was India, and that's how she was. You see what I'm saying? And so for us as Latinos, as Chicanos, as Mexican Americans, we were like, es porque son indios. Mm-hmm. So the fact that you did certain things and traditions, because of that, it was just normal.
Yeah.
But it was kind of like, oh, you haven't given up those ways of living. Mm-hmm. That's all that was.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It was, when you talk about African American heritage, they just say, oh, their country. Oh, they're from, they're still South. They haven't moved to the city. It's that idea. Mm-hmm. And so for us, I realized, my grandfather, who was my step-grandfather, actually, my grandfather was from Cañada Verde, which was the rancho, right? It was Floresville. It was the rural part of Texas. Well, it's, an hour south of San Antonio, but he spoke only Spanish. Mm-hmm. So we didn't say it's because he's 16th part, Coahuilteco. It was this, oh, es porque es del rancho, And I realized that you could keep your traditions.
It's beautiful when you start to discover and rediscover your culture.
So as I was trying to prove that I was indigenous enough to play Tecumseh, all of this realization is there. And it's like, oh, okay. And I always say, I just got to put white paper on it. That's all. It's stuff we know in our hearts. So I think being multicultural and identifying Chicano taught me to think outside of that box, right? So even as I was identifying Chicano, it meant different things to me. It didn't mean I'm this or that. It meant, oh, ¿sabes qué? I could be a lot of things, And what are those things? A modern Chicano is a lot different than a Chicano from the 60s, a Chicano from the 70s, The difference between someone who says they're a Pachuco, or someone says they're Cholo, or someone from Nuevo Mexico who's from the low-riding community, or someone from, South Texas who's from East Los was very specific, So I had to call on all those powers when I was playing Crucito because I wanted to really tell the story of East Los.
Before you get into that, you mentioned something that I've had a lot of conversations with my Latino friends, right? Is the dialogue of representation for Latinos and how that's expressed. So, like you said, there's Cholos, Latinos, Latine, Latinx. There's all these terms. And when I'm having these conversations, even in Canada, I think it's Latin American Heritage Month. In the US, it's Hispanic Heritage Month. There's a lot of different terms that are thrown out to identify our culture. How do you look at that? Is there one correct term? Is there a term that you identify with?
Yeah.
How do we educate even ourselves on how we identify?
Yeah. I always say that whenever I say, because I love saying raza, because I had learned early on, I had learned it through identifying as la raza cósmica. And that was in my early Chicano teachings. There was a lot of artists, right? And the artists always identified with this kind of spiritual, cultural power that we had as Chicanos, right? And that was the artist part of it. And it was that the Mayans were the dimension travelers, the space travelers, right? They were the scientists, right? If you look at Jose Argüelles, the Mayan factor, and they're talking about them astronomical numbers that's quantum mathematics, dude. Whoa, Mesoamerica, right? Who knew? But also, the Toltecas and how artistic they were, and then the Mexica, how they were able to be barbarians and nomadic cultures, absorb that 1,000-year-old Tolteca culture, make it their own, and then become the empire that they became,
right? Which
was the marvel of administrative, militant might to be able to do that. But those roots and where those come from, right? And so when I heard raza cósmica, it was like, oh, that's it. So I never heard raza like it was later identified in American culture stereotypically as, when they talk, raza is low class, right? So a lot of Mexican Americans did not like you to call them Chicanos, right? So they would say, don't call me that, and I'm not raza, I'm not raza. But again, growing up in the art scene, in the cultural scene, in the music scene, to say raza, it was beautiful. Hey, my raza, Hey, mi raza, ¿qué pasó? Estamos escuchando radio, you know what I mean? So growing up with conjunto music in the house, growing up with an identification, but being barrio intellectuals, as an artist, again, I started to use it as a young adult who identified Chicano to set myself off. And again, using that to commercialize myself in a different way, right? I started to use raza, but then realized that I had to explain. And I would say, when I say raza, I mean all razas. And so all of a sudden, I just used a word and an identification of a word to unify us, right?
That's beautiful.
And I think that you can do the same thing with identification. Even when you look at the movie La Misión, right?
Beautiful movie.
Where Peter Bratt, again, way ahead of its time also.
Yeah.
In 2010, talking about, a gay Latino son with a very macho ex-gangster father, you know, and the cultural wound of that he's dealing with that leads him back to alcoholism, which started all the pedo to begin with. Who's talking about that, you know? While you're showing low riding as a beautiful family event that now this father-son can no longer participate in because of this father's biases, right?
Yeah.
Not the son. This kid's getting ready to go to UCLA. Culturally, he's that beautiful young Chicano we love. He knows how to build cars. He knows how to talk the talk. He's got the lingo. He just happens to be different in that way. That's not culturally accepted. When we made the film and we were trying to figure out how to promote it, because again, Hollywood was like, you know, we don't want to touch that. We don't know where to sell that. Even though Latino content was hot at that time.
Yep.
There was about 3 or 4 Latino films at Sundance. But they couldn't get a deal, dude.
Wow.
They couldn't get a deal. And so they walked away. And so I was like, man, I can't believe 15 years later you guys are in the same boat. Yeah. But we have Facebook. I go, not only do we have Facebook, but now I run this town. And me and you, Benjamin, we have the legacy of Blood In, Blood Out. Yeah. So the first thing they told me was not the Pratt brothers, but the people that were doing the promotion. They said, well, we don't know if, we don't want to, because the first thing I said is, you know, we're doing a lot of art houses. We're doing a lot of queer film festivals, which is okay. But I think we're missing the boat because low riding, Jesse, Borrego, Benjamin, Brad, why are we, and they went, well, yeah, but right now it's a challenge for the Latino community to accept the marketing that we're going to do, which is that it's about, you know? And I went, 2 things. I think you're underestimating the sophistication of the Latino audience. I know them. I like it like that, carnal.
Jesse, you've done all the classics.
Hello. So I was like, so I already knew. I was like, queer and homosexuality in the Latino culture is accepted. They just don't like to put it out there. And yes, like every other culture, there is a division within families. That's a trauma. That's what this film's talking about it. No one else can talk about it like this. Look at what Peter's doing, man. Peter's way ahead of his time. Again, follow me home. And so they were kind of on the fence about it, and I went, look, give me San Antonio, I'm going to sell it as a low-riding movie. So when I went to San Antonio, I had a low-riding cavalcade. I stood in front of the theater. I went on in the press and said it's the sequel to Blood In, Blood Out. Me and Benjamin, we have a lot of Vatos Locos in there. And San Antonio did really well for them. They made some money in San Antonio. All in all, because of that, because we were able to promote it to the Latino audience along with the artistic audience, they were able to make at least half their money back.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And because of that, they were able to release on DVD on their own, and now they own their own film.
It's beautiful.
So the Latino audience saved us. They saved a film that Hollywood swore would not, you know, that the Latino
successful.
audience was not sophisticated enough.
Let's talk about that.
You know?
A common theme that I've heard you speak on is the fact that there's sabotage towards Blood In, Blood Out specifically, but also lack of infrastructure, lack of support for Latino films.
Yeah, you know, and I wouldn't say it's necessary. You know, it's not sabotage, dude. It's not like that. It's kind of...
you don't think Disney sabotaged Blood In, Blood Out?
Well, it was actually a business move for them because there was 2 very significant social events happening. American Me had caught a lot of negative publicity because of some idea that the actual prison clicas didn't like it, right? I don't know how true that all was. It's a lot of this is rumor and mythology that's grown in the internet.
I've heard some of that too myself, yeah.
But Universal did the opposite. That studio did the smart thing and turned into the negative publicity. You see what I'm saying?
In which way?
You got to go see this film. They went, yes, look at all the controversy.
And embrace the idea that any publicity is good publicity. Right?
Come see how authentic it is. Edward James Olmos, that and the fact that Edward James Olmos did such an incredible job. Dude.
Incredible.
I mean, he broke my heart.
Yeah.
And he revealed something about a character that was deep, right? So whether it was whatever the negative stuff was from the powers that be, the reality of it is it got the film seen. So American Me, but it blew up all that publicity. So the Disney, think about it. Hollywood Pictures is Disney. They went, wait a minute, that's not the type of marketing we want. And I think they were already on the fence about the subject matter, because they let Taylor, that was Taylor's baby,
They gave him carte blanche until they saw the screening.
Yeah. Right? Taylor Hackford and Katzenberg, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, I think when they saw the screening, because that's where the 5-hour version comes from.
Right.
So I think it was, so here's the business move. So again, they spent a whole year with this genre type, similar type of film blowing up, but with this negative publicity. So they were already in the fence. Then the riots happened.
Yeah.
And LA got burned to the ground, dude.
Yeah.
I was in LA at that time.
Wow.
Imagine Toronto, dude, smoking.
Yeah, wild. I can't even imagine.
There would not be no movies. The studios closed. Cops were surrounding the studios. There was no auditions. There wasn't nothing going on.
Right.
So I think in that time period, Disney looked at a brand and went, this is not really the type of film that we should be releasing right now. That's what I think, if I think about it. Because by the time it got to me, that was 6 months later. That was after the riot. It was at the end of the year.
That's what I've heard.
And
that's
I
what
was
I've
like,
read.
we'd already done the press junket at the beginning of the year, before all the pedo, So we had we were in Miami. We were like, we did New York. We did Chicago. Man, Raza came out. I was like, we're going to make Disney. They were predicting it was going to make $40 million the first weekend. Think about it, yeah.
Believable.
And if you watch it on Hulu and you see it in 4K, I mean, Gabriel Beristain, Mexicano, director of photography, shot a beautiful film.
Beautiful.
He made East Los look like a beautiful mamazota mujer, man. It was like, right? Everybody wanted to go there and see this place.
That's what made me want to go to LA.
The destinations have become treasures, not
you
only
you
of
saw
the
me
tourists,
posting them. I just recently went to
but also
El
the
Pino.
barrio, dude. The barrio
Of course.
itself is like, well, if it hadn't been for that film, people wouldn't even, you know what I mean? It was that 100%. Kind of thing. It was a love letter in many ways.
It really was.
From the director of photography, from Jimmy Baca, from Taylor Hackford, from the actors. All of the actors wanted to represent correctly and well. So, it was a very different feel from American Me. American Me was a very dark, really very much Chicano film noir, dude, very much so.
That's a good way to put it.
Even in the performance. Blood In, Blood Out was always designed to be 2 films. So it was going to be Godfather 1 and Godfather 2, you know what I mean? So that type of energy was there. It was there. Again, Disney had not seen it, right? Mm-hmm. Disney was like, okay, all we know is that we've given you this money. We've been waiting for 3 years, and we've seen some rushes and some screens, good stuff, but we're not really sure. So at that point, they went to Taylor and they went, hey, Taylor, we're going to put it out on VHS. Mm-hmm. And Taylor went, what? They said, yeah, we don't think we should release this film right now. Apparently there had been a skirmish. They said it was a shootout, but I never heard any real story that in Vegas there was some pedo at one of the screenings between a couple of representatives of clicas, right?
Interesting.
So I don't know if it was this, if it was that, dude. To me,
do you think that it's true? Do you think that happened?
There might have been a fight, dude, but between dudes who didn't like each other.
Yeah,
not because of the film. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It was like,
it's almost an excuse to do something they already wanted to do.
I think, bro.
Yeah.
I think because again, I just told you about another company that did the same thing.
Yeah.
And spun it and made, So I think it was a business move. I think they looked at their books. They said, we're solid. We can take a hit.
You know what's interesting, though? Because they saw the numbers upon demand when it was released on VHS. Because that was getting picked. Everybody that I know that's Latino has a copy on VHS.
Okay, so you know it has 3 names, right?
Blood in, Blood out,
so
Sangre por Sangre.
The only way they released it on theater is if Taylor would change the name. And that's how it caught the name Bound by Honor.
Yeah.
So by the time it came to me, Taylor said, look, with everything that's happened this year, the only way they'll let us release it is if we change the name. And I went, what? We've been promoting it as Blood in, Blood out for 3 years, dude. We did the press junket as Blood. And he goes, that's the only way. Otherwise, they're going to put it out on VHS. And I went, like that? And he said, yeah. I said, oh, my God. So when he said Bound by Honor, I said, but then when they released it on VHS, they changed the name back to Blood in, Blood out.
So do you think that it registered in people's minds, the original marketing?
That's business, baby. That's marketing 101. Wow. That's marketing 101. They wanted the Latinos to rent it at the VHS. So that lets me know that it was a business move. It wasn't a sabotage. It was a business move. To them, it was like, this is better. This protects the brand, which is a business move, and this still gets us our play, which is a business move. So, then when it went on DVD and they put out the director's cut, which had more of Taylor's cut in it. So, unfortunately, there's that whole rumor about a 5-hour version. You ever heard that rumor?
I've heard Damien Chapa say that there's a 5-hour version that he saw.
Well, it was an internet rumor for years. Oh yeah, I saw a 5-hour version. And then I finally asked Taylor, I go, Taylor, what? And he goes, well, no. He goes, there isn't a 5-hour version. It's probably been destroyed. He goes, but I put together a 5-hour version that I showed the Disney executive because I was trying to convince them that I already had part 2. All I needed was permission to release them as 1 and 2. He goes, I didn't need to shoot anymore, right? I had it. And at that point, they were so cold on the project that they said, we don't care, cut this down. And that's why the movie's 3.5 long, because he had to cut the 5-hour version down. And I was like, wow, that would be incredible to get that footage back.
That'd be amazing. Does that exist somewhere?
I don't think, he said he doesn't think so. He doesn't think so.
So he doesn't have it? He wouldn't have access to it? No. The studio has it.
No. Yeah, because I asked him, I go, do you still have it? He goes, no. He goes, I just put that. He goes, the studio's got it.
Wow, that would be amazing.
But putting together the book, it was great because they allowed him to go to the archives and pick out some of Merrick Morton's incredible stuff, and that's why the book has the 4 authors.
Beautiful.
Taylor, it's his journals, Jimmy Baca's original poetry.
Wow.
He read some of it at Cal State when we released the book at the beginning of the year. It's like, man, you haven't missed a step, carnal. He's got that beautiful voice, his delivery. But the pieces that he wrote for the book, it's like 30 years later, it's still creating art.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Still creating art. So the book is beautiful, Hat and Beard Press.
They're on second edition now. First edition sold out almost immediately. Yeah. I missed it there. I put my order in for second edition. It's on the way. It's coming.
Yeah.
So I recommend to everybody watching, put your order in now.
Please. It's a beautiful book. Any collector would want it.
Yeah.
But number 2, there's a lot of the actors that weren't, stars at the time. When you look at the lineup of people that were in that film. Yeah. Billy Bob Thornton, Ving Rhames, Delroy Lindo, Michael T. Williamson, Benjamin Bratt. That role, when you look at that role, that's one of my favorite, performances.
Your character of Crucito, obviously it's synonymous almost at times with who you are. People look at you and I'm sure people are like, Crucito, maybe on the street. Do you at any point ever get tired of that character? Do you ever feel like, I love this character for what it is, but I'm also tired of this character?
No, I don't think so, because you see me, I don't try to play any character that someone identifies with, because number 1, if you're a good artist, then it's all autobiographical, ¿verdad? So you try to put your onda into anything you do, at least I do. And so if you look at my character on Fame, Jesse Velasquez, you know, a lot of people thought he was Puerto Rican, but it turns out he was Mexicano from Juarez. So he was a dreamer way before they called him dreamers. But if you look at that character, that's Jesse Borrego, dude. You know, that's the singing, the dancing, that's everything that I learned from my father and my sister and our family, artistic, my grandmother, right? Same thing with Cruz. What he wanted from me was not a Cruz character. He wanted Jesse. And so he knew that if I took that character, you know, and he said, you can either play, because at that time he didn't have anyone, so he was trying to get me in the project. He was like, look, you want to play the cop? You can play the cop. You know, you want to play? And I was like, no. The artist is the one, because that's where I'll be able to put the most of who I am into, right? But that being said, once Cruz lived, and once that character survived and lived on forever for 30 years in that world, that's Cruz, you know. One of the revivals of him was in later years when Adán Hernández was struggling, and I said, look, they need to know who you are. Everybody thinks I painted those paintings. I do a living doing meet and greets. You come out there with me, right? And we'll split the bill, you know, and they'll get 2 for 1. But more than that, we'll start to exemplify your art, dude, and get you back known.
That's a real brother.
It's not only the artista, but the artista que hizo los cuadros de Blood In, Blood Out.
That's beautiful that
and
you
that
did
played
that,
Gilbert, you know what I mean? And then we could connect it to Gil, and so we would have a blast, you know, in Paz Descanse, in his last years, man.
Rest in peace.
We did like you know, I wouldn't say it was about 10 years worth, but it was definitely a good long time of us really promoting the role of Cruz as 2 halves of it. You see what I'm saying?
Of course.
So to me, there was no I'm tired of Cruz, because now Adán is Cruz. And we would even laugh because he would say, or I would say, depending on which one of us was trying to hook the fish, right? I'd say, the real Cruzito, you know, or I'd go, I'm the real Cruzito, yeah. And so we would play that banter. We had this whole, we had a whole onda where we would kick it around.
How do you continue
the real Cruzito and the actor Cruzito. And
yeah.
You see what I mean? So Cruzito was almost like this amalgam of different influences, carnal. So for me to represent that, it's like, oh, it's bigger than Jesse Borrego. You see what I'm saying?
I've talked to a lot of musician friends. I interview a lot of music artists as well.
Yeah.
And sometimes when they look back at some of their earlier music, some of them are like, man, I can't even believe I made this song. This is like not me anymore. I can't even picture myself writing this.
Yeah, because as an artist, you should be evolving.
Right?
Yeah.
So when you look at some of your, especially earlier roles that still resonate with people today, El Duran, right, some of these characters that you've played, do you ever think that? Do you look back and say, this was great at that time, but I don't necessarily identify with this character in this way anymore? Or
I think as an artist, you better believe in what you're doing, dude, because it is going to live forever. So if you didn't believe in it at that time, and you're embarrassed of it now, then, you know,
wow, it's powerful.
There's maybe, I would say there's less things like that in my career than there are, you know, things like Blood In, Blood Out, you know. When you heard me talk about I Like It Like That. Well, the reason I'm so proud of that slate of projects is because I did Blood In, Blood Out, Mi Vida Loca, which is the feminist perspective on La Vida Loca, on the gang life. You know, beautifully written by Allison Anders, but beautifully created because Veronica La Stranger, you know, she was the one who was coming up with the story with Allison.
Yeah.
She was an Echo Parque girl. So she...
I read there was real...
but that was Allison as a filmmaker, as a real filmmaker going, hey, come here. Let's tell this story. Yes, you're going to be an actress in it. Yes, you're going to help me write it. You're going to... I'm the filmmaker. Let's do this. And then say, okay, I have a lot of real actors. Oh, I'm sorry. I have a lot of real people being themselves. Who do I know as an actor that can play this character but still work with these young chicanitos. Hey, Jesse Borrego, would you?
Of course.
And this is after working on a big studio film, Blood In, Blood Out, where I was the star, dude. And me just went, okay, hell yeah, because what you're doing is right, Allison. You're telling the woman's part of the story now. This needs to be done.
Wow.
And yes, El Duran, I'm going to take him from this very classic macho character, this kind of spiritual lover character who's going to sacrifice himself for love. You know what I mean? Within the context, because if you look at Allison's film, it's completely different than Blood In, Blood Out.
Very different,
right?
very different.
Yeah, it's very, love ain't easy, girl. You know what I mean? Right?
Yeah.
Beautiful. They were made, dude, they were released back to back, 93, 94. This year we're celebrating 30th anniversary.
Wow.
So
amazing,
when I look back and think, I wasn't planning to do that, dude. I was just following the arte. But Los Lobos is in Mi Vida Loca. Danny Trejo does a cool little part in Mi Vida Loca.
Yeah.
Noah Verduzco is one of the Echo Park kids, little Juanito.
Salma Hayek.
Salma Hayek. So you see the connections that just keep following.
It's beautiful because you laid it out properly. There was people from the neighborhood. There was community.
Yeah.
There was established actors, and then even being able to identify new talent like Salma Hayek. At that time, that was her first role, right?
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
It's also incredible that you, as someone in the arts community, has seen and been witness to somebody like Janet Jackson in her early days, Salma Hayek in her early days, and then you look at them now and you're like, I saw their start.
Yeah.
I was there for their beginning.
And the thing is, like what I would always say about Janet is you knew that she wanted to do something. Because when she was working on us on the set of Fame, she would say, this is just a stepping stone. I want to do my own music. So she was already talking about what she sang about. Control, breaking away. Miss Jackson, if you're nasty, sorry, you don't get to talk to me like that. She was growing up. But she was doing it right there in front of us.
Yeah.
So if you pay attention, it's the same thing with Blood In, Blood Out, because Adan would ask me years later when we saw that it was a cult film, right? That he was known again in Canada, in Japan. Once he started connecting with you guys on the internet, he really realized that it was international. So then he would come back and he was flabbergasted, did you ever think that it was gonna? And I would look at him and go, of course, carnal. I said, I knew what I was doing. I don't know what you thought you were doing. Yeah. But I knew that what we were doing was something special.
Yeah.
So when the business move came to show it, not show it, that doesn't make it any less fabulous or special, dude. So now when you pull it out and you put it out there, and people start to look at it, and they study it, and they take a picture of it, and they share it, and it moves on, and it becomes a shirt and an icon, and a saying, and a meme, and a way of life. That's what I learned about our cultures, that we're always absorbing, and we're always evolving, So the evolution to me shouldn't be leaving things behind. When we talk about recién llegados, first generations, inmigrantes, even gente de Mexico. I didn't understand, and we talked about how I demanded that I dub my own voice, Crucito's voice in Espanol. When I found out that they were going to release it as Sangre por Sangre simultaneously, and we had a big press junket in Mexico because Disney had a big presence in Mexico. So even though it was undermined here, over there in Latin America, in Mexico, it had full release, Sangre por Sangre.
Right.
So for 30 years, it's been a hit in Latin America, right? And never was really subverted there. So I finally watched Sangre por Sangre in Mexico with an audience, right?
Wow.
In Michoacán, dude.
Special way to watch it.
Up in the hills of Michoacán, dude. Elpidia Carrillo, well known from The Predator, Salvador, beautiful Mexican actress, but made a living in American films. Mi Familia. She was in Mi Familia. She was Jimmy Smith's wife, Elpidia.
Oh, okay.
So Elpidia, really well known. I think she's Blue Beetle's mom in the new Blue Beetle. I think she is. But Elpidia's had a career, right? Well, she has this festival in Michoacán. And she goes, hey, come to these indigenous Purepecha villages up in Michoacán. They love Blood and Blood. And I was like, really? Go up to Michoacán, man. And out in the campo. Crucito? Ala. Perdón, pero usted es Crucito? Yes, man. Beautiful like that. And so I go, yo estoy impresionado que ustedes acá conocen a Sangre por Sangre. No, es nuestra película. So I realized, wow, it's been their hit for 30 years.
Of course.
So coming back, and so I watched it and I realized that when you watch Sangre por Sangre, it doesn't play as just a Chicano story.
Mm-hmm.
It plays as our universal story.
Yes.
As immigrants, as marginalized communities, as communities of color, as second-class citizens that are being treated as second-class citizens in our own neighborhoods, cities, landscapes, right?
It unites. The story
unites us, dude. It unites us. Because even if you're a first-generation immigrant, how long before you're where you're from, where you're living, where you're breathing, where you're... You know what I'm saying? How long before you're accepted, in other words?
Right.
So then you look at Blood In, Blood Out as Sangre por Sangre, and it impacts you in a whole different way.
Definitely.
You know, people in Japan who love Chicano culture, low riding, the way they dress, the music, they absorb Blood In, Blood Out in a totally different way.
Yeah.
You know?
You mentioned something interesting earlier where you said the way that film can preserve the best things about you. And I think about the way that Blood In, Blood Out preserves, for everyone who's watched that film, identifies with that film, the relationship between you, Benjamin Bratt, and Damien Chapa. In people's mind, it's seared into their mind the way that they imagine that you interact.
Yeah.
What has that been like, sharing that journey with these guys for 30 plus years now, and then knowing that this is stamped in history with us looking this way, but there's a brotherhood outside for real? What has that relationship evolved into 30 years later after being on screen like that?
Yeah. It's a brotherhood that never dies. Like, it very much is carnalismo, you know. And I think as the Chicano who was given the task of making sure that we were authentic and familia, you know, I took the carnales in, you know, and Benjamin always talks about that. He goes, whatever great work I did in Blood In, Blood Out was due to, you know, how magnanimous an actor and a person Jesse is. And it's not a...
Damien says the same, by the way. I've talked to Damien. He gives you all the praises.
Yeah, and you know, and that was really... And it was Damien's first film, so I wanted him to know that he was the lead. He was the star. And so he had to feel comfortable enough in his skin to be able to do what I knew he could do as an actor, right? So I think the process for us was about that, was about bonding, you know, and it was about bonding in a really cool way, because I had to get them to trust me, so that when we got into Vato Loco 101 school and we're sitting there at the table in East Los with the balazos going off, and that we were there, but then that, you know, on that Easter Sunday, we were going to go hand out Easter baskets to the barrio, and we wanted us to feel like we were part of it, you know. And so I think that the beauty of those vatos is they took that on, you know. It kind of changed Damien's life, because after that he became a filmmaker, you know, and he, you know, started Amadeus Pictures and from then on he's become a filmmaker. But it was the start of that. It was the process. It was the ability to be able to identify with something that he might not have identified with before, because, you know, he had been separated from his father. But when I spoke to his father at the house that we were staying there, in a beautiful familia, the Vasquez familia, took care of us there in East LA. And when we were there, we got that call from his father in Texas. It sounded just like my father.
Wow.
And I was like, Damien, it sounds like my dad, dude. And he goes, yeah, you know, I spent time in South Texas. And he would tell me, he goes, man, when you start talking like Crucito, you sound just like my tios, right? And I said, that's it, carnal. That's what we want to do. You know, we want to embody that, and it's so that it seems like we've been living together the whole time. And I think he was able to really renew that, because the memory started coming like crazy. And I think at that point he found, you know, the Miklo character.
Right.
And I think then as an actor, once you find the character, then as an actor, you can do your work.
Juanito Always Loved Me More. Bro, that scene in everybody's mind, when they think of that film, that is the heart-wrenching, gutted, like you feel the pain in that scene from the two brothers that are combating the other brothers in the hospital with the leg shot off. But the point is, that scene, I could rewatch that scene and you can put it back to back with the best film in the world. Whoever says this is the best film in the world, take that scene, put it right beside the best scene in any movie.
I always tell people we were supposed to win Academy Awards.
That scene alone would have won the award.
If one of us actors hadn't been nominated for a supporting, there definitely would have been a cinematography best TP. Definitely Taylor would have been in the running, dude, because what was up in that year? You know, best director, Jimmy for best screenplay, Bruno Rubeo production design, you know, along with Adan Hernandez. You know, Mayas Rubeo, Mexicana for, you know, just the period costuming of, you know, it put you right in East Los in the 70s. I mean, I don't know, man. Music, Bill Conti, someone would have been nominated. Someone we had not won. Yeah. Academy Award. And I think that's the type of constant synergy that was happening, dude. Every moment.
We're going to get into a speed round quick. Before we do that, I want to end on one note. You mentioned Blue Beetle a little bit earlier, especially as a new Latino film. I got a chance to interview Angel Manuel Soto about the film when it dropped. Great director. I love that he did a Latino cast, Latino superhero film. I don't think that the reviews were too favorable. I don't think that it did amazing in the box office the way we would have wanted. And I remember when I posted the interview I did with him, I got interesting feedback that I didn't think I was going to get. So a lot of people started saying this film was not good, it wasn't great. And I started looking at who were the people commenting, and it was a lot of Latinos that were kind of hating on this film. A lot of people that I know in my community were hating on this film. This film wasn't good. And then it dawned on me that if we as Latinos don't support our own filmmakers, don't support our own films, don't support our own content, how are we expecting to get greenlit for more projects if we're not showing up to support? Now, there's a fine line here.
Double-edged sword, yeah.
Because at the same time, you don't want to support something that you genuinely don't like, but you do want to support something so that there's more opportunities for representation for people like you. So, you being in the film industry, how do you look at the right way to support Latinos in the industry? Like, how do you personally support?
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword, and I think you do have to play both sides. You know, you do have to be critical, and I think probably I think a lot of the issue was, why did they wait? How long have the Marvel? Okay, there's three problems. First of all, when you're talking about a relevant social narrative, comic books, really? You see what I'm saying? So I think but in terms of business, great move. Yeah, you bought a franchise by buying the Star Wars franchise, by buying Marvel franchise, by buying DC. You're buying an audience already. Actually, like I said, Elpidia was the mom in Blue Beetle. She does great work. The actors in it were stellar. The kid who played Blue Beetle. And the film, in comparison to other Marvel films, was a good film. I don't see what you would say that it's not a good film. What, it wasn't done as well, right? No, it had the slickness, it had the characters, it had the special effects. But the issue is, yeah, it's coming from a tired franchise that the industry loves because it makes them money, right? Okay, so probably some of those people were reacting to that, right? Then, why Blue Beetle? Why didn't they give him a Superman? I'll bet you if he had done a Latino Superman, I bet you some of those fans would have been,
that's a great
finally
point.
got a Latino super. Well, again, that's that cultural divide. So when I talk to young Latinos in filmmaking, and to the point of that you should support Latino projects if they're Latino filmmakers, and this is why. So when I teach them at school, and I'm teaching them about business, but also that it's a cultural battle. and it's a social battle. I got accepted into the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, so I'm a voter. And the first question that the press asked me, so does that mean now that you're going to be voting, for the Latino category just because they're Latino? And I sat there and went, do you ask that question of other nominees that are not Latinos or culturally? I go, you got to assume that anybody who's nominated, regardless of their cultural or story or whatever, is deserving to be there.
Right.
So any of those 5, 6, 7 nominees could be the winner, no matter who I vote for. Oh, but guess what? I was hired under a diversity initiative. 2021 Aperture Diverse. Wow. What is that word, diversity? Hello, of course. I'm going to exemplify the best of the best of the best. So I don't know what you're asking with that question, but I'm going to vote for the best. Yeah.
Of course.
But it was a strange question. So you see what I'm saying?
I feel you, yeah.
So in that sense, you do have to be very supportive. But I think also now we have to push the envelope. Hey, don't give my boy a Blue Beetle, man. Let him direct a Superman,
give
a Batman.
Him the Spider-Man, yeah.
Come on, man.
And I like what you're saying, because I think that's true. If it was obviously a more popular character, it would have more popular results, right? Just from the offset.
Yeah.
Makes more sense.
They had allowed a Latino to choose which of the Marvel superheroes, it might have been a different one.
Yeah.
I really do believe that,
Thanks for that insight, man. Yeah. And I agree with you. It takes these conversations to keep it going, too.
Yeah.
Okay, let's dive into a quick speed round. We don't have a lot of time.
Órale.
First thing that comes to mind, okay? Not including Blood In, Blood Out, what is your favorite Latino film? Not including Blood In, Blood Out.
Los Olvidados.
Ooh.
Buñuel.
Okay. Who is the greatest Latino actor? Not including yourself. I would put you up there.
A lot of people don't really consider him an actor, but I always loved Cantinflas, dude.
Oh, shoot, yeah.
Did you ever see when he did what's the story with the Don Quixote?
Yeah.
He did a production in his later years when he was older of Don Quixote in Spain, and it was all Spanish actors, so you could tell that they were all trained, right? They were talking. He played Sancho Panza as Cantinflas. But dude, with the acting, because he had to act. And I was like, man, just people don't realize he was such a good actor. Sure, he was
So go
funny.
back and rewatch that.
Yeah.
Okay, this last one. Let's talk Latino hip-hop for a second. What is the best Latino hip-hop song that gets you in the mode when you're about to go in and crush an audition, as an example? Something that you put on and you're like, this gets me in the zone. Latino hip-hop.
This is for the raza. My man Frost.
Hey.
Yeah.
That's the one.
It's got the marimba. It's got the little malo cut in there. But I remember when that one came out, and I was in the Familia.
Yeah.
I was in that video with some of my other family. But I've known Frost for a while.
Legend.
Since he was Kid Frost.
Legend.
Yeah, since the hip hop days.
He also he also made a cameo in Mi Vida Loca, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. He was the dad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But as a lover of club music, I already knew him from the LA scene.
Amazing.
So when the Latino hip hop started to bust out, I already knew of him from his shows. But when he, after Blood In, Blood Out is when we really started to blow each other's stuff up. And he's on one of the compilations, but he was with the Funky Aztecs or something like that.
Yeah.
It was like a hip hop group, but he was in one of the early Blood In, Blood Out compilations, dude. When he started recording and hitting it, I was like, man, that's it. That's these are our anthems.
Yeah.
Right? This is what we need to follow it.
He's dropped some anthems.
So to me, I always needed This Is for the Raza, dude. That just gives me the
Last bonus question.
Yeah. Bonus round.
If you were to text Damian Chapa or Benjamin Bratt right now, who would call you back first?
Benjamin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's quicker at responding.
Yeah. Damian's always busy, man. Damian's always on the run. So is Benjamin, but I think Benjamin is Damien's got a lot of projects back to back to back to back, so he's always traveling. Benjamin's a little more stable in terms of he works on something for a few months.
Yeah.
And then he works on something for a few months. He's usually here on the East Coast.
Right. Yeah.
You know, because him and his wife and their kids, they all live here. So,
Jesse, thank you, man. I appreciate you so much.
Chop it up.
You're a legend, bro. The Vatos Locos forever, bro.
Carnal.
Thank you, bro, for everything, man.